Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I know you're probably thinking right now, is this the multi-millionaire marketing director from 2% Marketing? Yes, it is. So in today's video, I want to talk about the law of rhythm. And I want to talk about how to utilize the law of rhythm to control oscillating frequencies. And more importantly, how to control your frequency, period. And what you need to understand about reality creation, what you need to understand is that internally we're creating constantly. We're creating in our awareness. We're creating in our consciousness. Everything is stemmed from who we're being in the present moment, how we're thinking, how we're feeling. And so the basis of reality creation is self. The basis of reality creation is your identity. And so that needs to at least be the backdrop so that you can understand the rest of the video. And so from the Kabbalion, the law of rhythm states that all things rise and fall. And so universally, nothing can stay stagnant. Everything is in constant motion. And because everything is in constant motion, that means that everything is moving in tides. Everything is moving in balance. If you've seen the yin and yang, right, it's one side and then the other side, right, moving in the opposite direction. And so the universe is balanced. If you look at nature, nature is completely balanced in its awareness of it. There's animals that are there to be the nourishment of other animals. Then there are animals that are used to repopulate certain things within nature. Everything is balanced in the sense that everything is created for a reason, unless it's man-made. So everything is in motion is what you need to understand, right? Is that nothing can stay stagnant. Everything, the universe is constantly innovating itself. Even now, the universe is constantly expanding. And so nothing can truly be in rest in this universe. And the purpose of that is so that you understand why frequencies oscillate, why you're constantly oscillating, why you're constantly in motion with your thoughts, constantly in motion with your feelings. And it's very important to understand that so that you can create your reality, because you need to be able to control how you're thinking and control how you're feeling so that you can control your reality. And so let's take a look at the outside world, right? The outside world is constantly changing based on our awareness of it. And so we are always choosing in our perception of reality based on who we are in the present moment. And so the understanding of that, right, is again, in the backdrop, in the beginning of this video, I talked about how we're creating our realities based on who we are being in the present moment. And so what you need to understand about the outside world that we experience our reality from, right, this third dimensional realm that we call Earth, that we call reality, that we see out of with our eyes, is that it's constantly in motion, constantly changing. Things happen constantly. Things are always in motion. There's things that you can't even see that are happening, maybe across the world, right? In fact, we can only see a less than a percentage of visible light with our eyes. I believe it's 0.0035% of visible light that we can see. And so there's 99.9965% of visible light that we're not seeing with our eyes. And so in this dimension that we call the third dimensional realm, right? What we're seeing out of everything third dimensionally is that we can't even see all of this, all of that which is happening in motion. And so the conceptualization of that in your awareness that I want you to put into your thoughts is that the outside world is constantly changing. And just like the split particle experiment, right? We're observing reality and reality is changing based on our observation of it. And so the conclusion is, since the outside world is changing and our perception of it is also changing, this leads to frequency oscillation. And I'll slow this down so that you guys can really conceptualize it. So since the outside world is constantly changing because it's in constant motion, right? Because the law of rhythm, everything rises and falls. Everything is in constant motion. Nothing is stagnant. And so the outside world is always changing, is always moving. Things are always happening. And while that is also happening, right, things are always changing. This causes our perception of things to change, right? One moment you can be happy and then something happens in your outside world and then now you can be sad because you've put your perception on a certain experience and now you're creating from that experience. And so the outside world is always changing and our perception of that is always changing. Therefore, this leads to the idea that our frequencies are oscillating. Correct? So now that you've truly conceptualized why our frequencies oscillate, because the outside world is always changing and we can always change in our awareness and our perception, which, circumstances, you need to understand what a frequency actually is. And so frequencies are our emotional and mental aptitudes. And so what I mean by emotional and mental aptitudes is emotionally, how are you feeling in the present moment throughout the day? How are you feeling when you wake up? How are you feeling throughout the day? How are you feeling through the middle of the day? How are you feeling towards the end of the day? How are you feeling before you go to sleep? Because everything is created from the present moment. And so if you're feeling sadness, self-loathing, anger, hatred, right? These are lower level consciousness feelings, shame, guilt. And so if you're constantly feeling bad, you're emitting a frequency based on your emotion. The universe operates on emotion. Emotion is energy in motion. We're in constant motion. All things rise and fall. Nothing is stagnant. And so if your emotional aptitude is a part of your frequency, and if you're always feeling bad, that's consistent in your reality because it carries over with you because you're always creating in your awareness, right? And so if you can't control how you feel emotionally, you're going to constantly create a reality where you always feel bad, right? And that's why they talk about things like depression. And it's also your mental aptitude. So emotionally, how you're feeling throughout the day, and now your mental aptitude. And your mental aptitude is based on your constant thought processes. How are you thinking throughout the day? What are you thinking of? How are you assuming? How are you believing? What do you believe is true for your world? What do you believe is facts for your world? How do you label things in your perspective, in your awareness? Essentially, your frequency is how you're feeling emotionally in the present moment and what are your thought processes in the present moment. Because understand this, that it takes 40 days to build a habit, right? And so consistently, you've been operating emotionally and mentally consistently for a long period of time. And so you've built in thought processes automatically. The moment that you see something, you're automatically going to label it a specific way. So if someone is not showing up in your reality in the way you want them to, you're automatically going to create in your perception that it's not going to work out, the worst possible scenario, the worst possible outcome. And your mind travels to that in your awareness because you've created that consistently. And so it's very important to understand in your awareness that we are always creating. And so as long as you're aware of the fact that you are creating, now you're able to put roadblocks in place to change the way that you're thinking and also change the way that you're feeling. And we do that by understanding that everything is created in the present moment. And so you have the power to choose. Now, the real question is, do you have the strength to choose what you want? But that's neither here nor there. And so, again, what is a frequency? Frequency is your emotional and mental aptitude. And I've broken it down into your I am. Now, if you don't know I am is God's name. Exodus 3:14. As it says in scripture, God's name is I am who I say that I am. And so God's name is I am. I am is your present moment identity. I am is everything that you encompass in your present moment. And that is why I put it with your emotional mental aptitude. And that is why I say, what is a frequency? It's all tied together. And so because all things rise and fall, you need to be able to identify the high and lows of our frequency, right? And we've all experienced good and bad frequencies. You'll know once I start explaining the feeling you get when you're riding a high versus the feeling that you get when you're riding a low. And it's consistent in its nature that when you're riding the high of a frequency, it feels like you are the main character in a story, movie, video game, and everything is just happening perfect and your life is in bliss. And it just feels like time is moving so fast because you're enjoying life. And then a low tide would be that you're feeling every second of time and that you're wondering if it could get worse. And you're like, is this really happening to me right now? Right? It's two different conceptualizations of the present moment, but you need to understand and identify where you are right now. Because once you understand where you are, then you can start building towards the other end. Or I guess if you're in the high tide, you don't want to build towards the low, but at least if you're high, you can understand when you're starting to lower so that you can go back up. If you're already low, then you need to start building yourself back up anyway. So the high tide, the highness of a frequency. The high tide is the peak of our current frequency. And you know if you're in the high tide based on your confidence level, okay? How much you love your life in the current moment, how much you're living in gratitude. You feel like you're indestructible. You feel like you can do anything. You feel like nothing can stop you, right? You're abundant in nature. You feel like you have everything you need. You feel like you don't need anything from the outside world. You have everything. You're perfect. And you have a lot of self-respect for yourself. Like you're not letting anyone walk all over you. You're just like, this is me. You're just being authentically you. And then the last and most importantly is that you have a lot of confidence, faith in your world. You just know good things are happening to you, and you're just like, this is it. Like, I know that this is going on for me. I know this is going to happen for me. And this is what I would call, if you're feeling at least a couple of these emotional states, these mental states, this would be considered the peak of your frequency. This would be considered the high tide. And so I've conceptualized this, the peak, as the God status, as I call it. I coined it. This is mine. I'm trademarking it. And so it's just the peak of your self-concept, the peak of your identity, the peak of your I am, the peak of your frequency, the peak of your emotional and mental aptitude, which is why I call it God status. Because it says in scripture, right, the Spirit of God dwells within us. And in scripture, it also says that Jesus did not consider himself to be lower than God. He considered himself to be on the same level as God. It's in scripture. Look it up. And so I call it God status because this is what it would probably feel like to be at the highest level of consciousness, just be in so much love, abundance, happiness, confidence, self-assuredness, authentic version of yourself. And this is the peak of our frequency when everything just seems to be going right and nothing seems to be going wrong. Now, the opposite of that, right? The drop, the low tide, the drop of our frequency. And the identifiers of a low frequency is low self-esteem, not a lot of self-belief in yourself. Self-loathing, right? You look in the mirror and you don't like what you see. You're looking in your reality and you're picking apart things that you don't like. I don't like my job. I don't like this. I don't like that. Critical, very critical, overly critical of your reality. Why does this always happen to me? Why do I always experience these things? Why do I always find the worst types of people? I don't understand why I'm attracting blah, 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 blah. Scarcity. There's never enough for me. The economy is bad. I don't understand why I never have enough money. I'm poor. I'm broke. Very, very scarce in your mindset. I can't find a job anywhere. The market is bad. Whatever, complaining. And then the most important part of a low tide of your reality is when you're completely defined by your ego. And what I mean defined by your ego is that you're completely defined by your third dimensional realm. You're being labeled by the third dimensional realm. And you feel this. The drop of your self-concept is your human status, right? This is when you're the most human because you're completely defined by your human experience. And understand that there's a difference, right? In the high tide, you're operating on the highest form of your self-concept, the highest form of your identity. And it's like you're riding a literal high. And in your mind, right, you feel indestructible. You feel like the world is just working with you. But in the drop of that, the low tide, you feel like the world is against you. And understand that in the conceptualization of both, you're not too far away. In both versions of the frequency drops, it's just a matter of perspective. If you've really looked at both, if you really understood what I was saying, that the confidence versus the low self-esteem is just a matter of perspective and awareness. Now, what causes someone with confidence to drop from confidence to no confidence? And that would be the ego being tied to the third dimensional realm, a circumstance happening, right? Where let's say that you're someone that's completely confident in themselves. You know, you have a good job and reality is always showing you the best version of yourself. And then something happens in your reality. Let's say you lose your job and now you're in the market and you can't find a job and bills are piling up. Your family's looking at you like, what's going on? And you start to drop in your confidence, right? Because of this situation, right? Because the stress is getting to you. But what's truly going on is you're completely attached to your ego, what you see. And your confidence was never built up on anything internally. It was built up of things externally, the job itself. And so you never really truly had an identity where you created that confidence from within. And now that you've lost something externally that you've attached to, now that drop in confidence is now creating a lower frequency where you're going to attract lower level things. And you're never going to truly actualize the things that you want because you never actually had an identity that was aligned to your actual desire. And so I wanted you to be able to identify the difference between a high frequency and a low frequency so that you can utilize that information when you're at the peak, when you know that you're at the peak because you can feel it. And when you feel like you're dropping your frequency lower based on these identifiers. And so the resolution of this, right, is what causes the drop in frequency? And if you picked upon it already, you should say circumstances, being tied to the third dimensional realm. And so understand this, my students, is that being tied to your ego, being tied to your third dimensional realm will always cause you problems. Because what is going to happen is that you're going to rely on your experience of this world to be tied by what you see, tied by what you feel. And as I dropped earlier, is that we don't see the majority of reality with visible light. And it's not your fault that you can't extract yourself out of the third dimensional realm. You will, in your awareness, right? This is all you know, right? This is your reality. It sounds insane, I bet, to be like, how can I not be tied by what I see? This is my reality. This is my experience. But understand again, right, that we are truly creating our realities based on our perception, based on our awareness. And so if you have to be defined by what you see, now you're going to allow the world to dictate who you are and label you and allow and create your experience for you. And just like in the example of the man that had the high paying job where he was confident and lost the job and then didn't bounce back, his turned his confidence to low self-esteem. Why? Because he was allowing the world to label him. He was allowing the world to give him his validation. And you have to understand that unless you are able to give yourself the meaning of your identity within, you'll always allow the third dimensional realm, the world, to dictate who you are. And as it says in scripture, right, the domain of this planet, the domain of the third dimensional realm, the owner of the third dimensional realm is not just God. It's also Satan. And this is not just to conceptualize the devil in your awareness, but the idea that the third dimensional realm is always changing. And our human experience is limited. And so if the human experience is limited, that means that life is a test, right? Because we're not going to be here forever. It can't be perfect because we're here limited. We're on borrowed time. And so how do they test? How does the world test us? How do we get tested? We get tested based on faith. And faith is based on something that you can't see, right? And so if you can't see, right, but you have to give your faith into something, now you're existing out of the third dimensional realm. And now you're existing on higher dimensions, higher awareness, higher perceptions. And that is how you stop the drop in frequency. Because as we get to the next level, it's like, how do we navigate the oscillating frequencies? How do we control the oscillating frequency? You do that by raising yourself in awareness, raising yourself in consciousness, raising yourself in perspective. So despite how the circumstances are happening to you in your reality, you still are the person that will dictate what the experience truly means for yourself. For example, again, going back to the man that lost the job, right? he lost the job, but because he focused on his perception of the lack, that he wasn't finding anything else, and it lowered his self-esteem. But if he just shifted his awareness to the idea and faith, knowing that he did lose his job, but that meant that God was going to give him something better. And he just lived in that every single day, despite how reality was showing up for him. He would have manifested, he would have actualized a desire where he would have found a better job because he truly believed in faith. And just remember that faith comes from the origin of the word confidence. And so if you know in confidence, if you expect in confidence, now you're esoterically utilizing the word faith to your advantage. And so the way that you navigate the oscillating frequency is that you raise your perception of the idea or of the ideals that the third dimensional realm is showing you. And so you don't bound yourself to circumstances anymore. If someone dumps you, you don't care because you know everything that's happening to you is perfect. If you are experiencing something that you would call a negative experience, you're not allowing it to define you because you know that you are the person that defines yourself. You're the person that identifies everything in your consciousness. You label everything. You give everything good or bad perspectives in your awareness because you're always choosing. Because remember, everything is being created in the present moment. Everything is being created in your I am. Everything is your identity. And so as long as you're able to raise yourself in awareness, you'll be able to, when you do drop in frequency, right? When you are experiencing self-loathing, scarcity, you're being critical of yourself and you're feeling low self-esteem, you'll be able to bounce back because you understand that you are the one that is creating everything and you are the one that is labeling things and you are the one that is deciding what is going on in your reality. And so what you truly need to understand, right, is how to control oscillating frequencies. You can never keep your frequency high forever, but you will be able to control the rise and fall. And so what I'm saying is that all things rise and fall, as stated in the Kabbalion, but you can never keep the frequency high because we're human and everything rises and falls. However, you will be able to control the rise and fall because you're able to control your perception, your mind, your awareness, your consciousness. You choose. And so as long as you choose correctly, right, you'll be able to navigate. Because the moment you start lowering in frequency, you'll be able to catch yourself and say, hey, I got to stop myself from thinking bad. I got to stop myself from thinking the worst possible outcome. I got to stop myself from assuming the worst. I know that I control my reality. I know that I'm creating everything in my present moment. I know that everything is based on my identity. And so you'll check yourself and say, hey, stop that. And you'll shift your awareness to something different. It's like, I expect the best. I know that everything that is happening to me is perfect. And in that, you'll shift your frequency and your emotional and mental aptitudes will pop back up because you are no longer feeling those lower level emotions and you're changing your awareness, which will then shift you upwards in frequency. And then you'll go back up. And again, it's going to be a bounce, right? It's not going to happen every hour, right? But there's going to be moments when you're really high and there's going to be moments when you're really low. And then there's going to be something in between. But as long as you're able to catch yourself when you start to shift down lower, then you'll never truly fall all the way to the bottom. And even if you do fall all the way to the bottom, you'll still rise all the way back to the top because you understand that all things rise and fall. And so this is how you control oscillating frequencies. By shifting your awareness, shifting your perspective, shifting your perceptions of your reality, because you understand the true fundamental laws of the universe is that you're creating everything from within. And so as long as you're choosing what you want within, what you want to experience within, then you'll always be able to control your rise and lowering of your frequency. But as long as you allow yourself to give up to the third dimensional realm, give up to your human status, give up to your ego, then you'll never be able to control your frequency because you're telling the world that you'll control it for me. And whatever you give me, that's what I'm going to become. And that's why 98% of the world operate the way that they do. And that's why now you're a part of the 2% of the world that operate completely different. I'll see you guys in the next video.